After the worst atrocities that Saddam carried out, including the gassing of the Kurds and the rest, the U.S. and Britain happily gave him aid and support, including aid that enabled him to develop weapons of mass destruction, as they knew perfectly well. And at that time, he was far more dangerous than he is today. Iraq was then a much more powerful state, and nothing was considered wrong with this. In fact, Daddy Bush went as far as in early 1990, a couple of months before the invasion of Kuwait, President Bush, number one, sent a high-level senatorial delegation headed by Bob Dole, the next presidential candidate, to Iraq to convey his greetings to his friend Saddam, tell him how much he appreciated his great contributions, and to tell him that he should disregard critical comments he's hearing occasionally from the American press. We have this free press thing here, and every once in a while somebody gets out of line, and maybe 1 out of 5,000 correspondents has a few remarks about how Saddam committed crimes, but Saddam was informed to just forget about that. He was also told that a critical commentator on Voice of America would be removed, so he wouldn't have that unpleasant experience of hearing about bad things that he does. That was a couple of months before he became the butcher of Baghdad and conquering the world and so on and so forth. So those words are omitted, and we know that it's not his crimes that are the reason for the intended conquest, nor is it his development of weapons of mass destruction, which George Bush, number one, was aiding him in constructing at a time when he really was dangerous, as was Britain. This is just the ultimate hypocrisy and a very good sign of the amazing discipline of educated people in the United States, Britain, France, and elsewhere, that they can let this continue without a whisper of protest. Have a look and see. Well, if those aren't the reasons, what are the reasons? Well, the reasons are pretty obvious. Iraq has the second largest oil reserves in the world after Saudi Arabia. It's been obvious all along that one way or another the U.S. would do something to regain control over that immense resource, way beyond the Caspian Sea and all of this. Certainly, the U.S. is going to deny those resources to its adversaries. Right now, France and Russia have the inside track on them, and the U.S. is going to take it over. And the question is, how? It's a very tricky operation. One problem, there's a lot of technical problems, like, exactly how do you do it, and that's what's being discussed, but those are minor problems. The real problem is that you have to ensure that there's got to be a new regime imposed, and the new regime must be completely undemocratic, and there's a reason for that. If there's any element of democracy in the new regime, the population will have some voice in what's happening, right? That's what democracy is. Population gets maybe a minimal voice. But the problem is that the majority of the population is Shiite, which means that to the extent that the majority of the population has any voice, it's going to be moving towards relations with Iran, which is the last thing the U.S. wants. We could go into the reasons for that, but it's obvious that the U.S. doesn't want it. Furthermore, the Kurds in the northern part, who are another big part of the population, are going to press for some kind of autonomy, and Turkey will go berserk if that happens, as will the United States. So somehow you have to have a regime change which restores something exactly like Saddam Hussein, a Sunni-based military regime which will be able to control the population. Furthermore, this is completely explicit. Right, you may recall that in March 1991, right after the Gulf War, there was a Shiite, the U.S. had total control of the area after the Gulf War, right? Complete control. There was a Shiite rebellion in the south, big rebellion, including rebelling Iraqi generals. They didn't ask for any aid from the United States. The most they asked for was that the U.S. allow them access to captured Iraqi equipment. George Bush I had a different idea. He authorized his friend Saddam to use air power to crush the Shiite resistance. General Schwarzkopf later said that when he authorized Saddam to use aircraft, he said he was snookered by the Iraqis. he didn't realize that when he authorized them to use military aircraft, they were all actually going to do it. So he was fooled, and this really shows how awful Saddam is. He tricks you all the time. So he used military aircraft to crush the Shiites, the same in the Kurds in the north. Right at that time, Thomas Friedman, who was diplomatic correspondent for the New York Times, a diplomatic correspondent is a term which means State Department spokesman at the New York Times. And he was giving the State Department line, and he was pretty frank about it. He said the best of all worlds for the United States would be an iron-fisted military junta which would rule Iraq the same way Saddam Hussein did, but with a change of name, because Saddam Hussein is kind of embarrassing at that point. And if we can't get that, we'll have to do second best. But that would be the best of all worlds, and that's the world they're trying to find now.